going to be presenting on XForms for metadata creation. Specifically, we're going to be talking about a mods editor. We met virtually over the summer when we found we were both working on creating mods editors using XForms. We didn't end up creating a common editor because our users were so different, but we thought it would be really useful to show both editors, two different approaches to sort of the same thing. So the problem, at least on the UVM side, was we needed mods records for our digital library project. Most of the records required original cataloging, and we're a very small department, and all of our cataloging is done by the cataloging staff at the library who are not familiar with XML and weren't all that interested in learning XML either, which is completely understandable. So I was poking around for a solution to this problem, and I came across XForms. When I started this project 2 years ago, I actually ended up using XForms for Dublin Core because it was very easy to get a Dublin Core XForms working. I think I had it working within a month once I decided to use it. Mods is a lot trickier because it's a lot more complex. Let me just quickly go over a little bit about XForms. Sorry. So XForms is defined as an XML application that represents the next generation of forms for the web, and it's seen as addressing a lot of the problems that HTML. Other instances to populate drop-down menus and to do things like authority control. For authority control, we're using MADS records, and we actually have tied them into this form. We allow our users to do a lookup. I don't want them sort of willy-nilly creating their own subject headings. So what they can do is they can do a lookup. I'll see how our connection to the server is here. Slow. So you can look up what we have in our database, select the appropriate ones. They get inserted into your mods record as appropriately formatted subject headings. We do this also for the name element as well. Up here, this is an example of instances populating drop-down menus. So we're using an instance in the model that looks for, first you specify which genre list you want to use. My art and architecture is actually very small. I only have 2 things in it. And then you can select from there. I don't know if I want to, this is a lot more of the same. Just to give you an idea, once a record is completed, it's changed from in process to complete. It gets removed from our queue, and once it's completed, they hit the catalogers hit publish. It gets sent to Solar, which is our full search, and then becomes live on the web. So we are actually interacting in a few different ways. We're interacting with our backend, which is a native XML database, exist. So every time the user saves it, this gets posted back into exist. And then when it's published, it gets posted to exist and gets posted to Solar. That's sort of the quick and dirty. I want to give Mike enough time to demo his too, so I'm going to move on. This is just sort of the architecture of what we have. We have exist for our data storage, interacting with our mods XForm, and then once it's published, it goes into Solar. I've actually gotten permission to publish the code for this form as open source, and you can find it at Google Code. There are a few examples, and I write a lot about this on my blog. So I want to turn it over to Mike now while he still has a lot of time.
Thank you. As Winona said, at Brown, we had to create a slightly different version of the mods editor, focusing on a different architecture and implementation. At Brown, we had the need for a custom mods XML editor. I wasn't able to find any open source solutions that would actually fit our specific needs. So why do we need the mods editor? Well, we've begun the design of our digital repository architecture, and we needed a way to collect the metadata from the users. Our users would be mostly faculty and scholars. Since they're non-librarians, they needed a tool to enter some basic descriptive metadata about their digital objects as they enter them into the repository. Our current tool right now is a desktop application, which wouldn't fit this need, and is more tailored towards our metadata librarians anyhow. So what were the requirements? It had to be web-based, since we would have external clients using it. We couldn't have them installing plugins or things like that. We had no control over that. The user interface, we want to keep it simple. We want to encourage them to deposit objects into the repository. So they're only required to put in a very minimum amount of descriptive metadata. However, we would be faced with the challenge of some faculty, some users, that would want to enter more complex data, larger amounts. So we also needed flexibility to handle that scenario also. And again, since they're not metadata librarians, we needed a way to try to enforce correct data input as much as possible. And we naturally wanted a way to keep this as easy to maintain as possible. One central place to maintain all of the selection values, authority lists, and things like that. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so as you can see, we only require 3 basic pieces of data from the user. And those pieces are tied to the actual XML has a constraint, which is a required field. So anything required will show up as highlighted. Anything with an exclamation point means that field is actually not valid. So once a user enters some data, you'll notice that it becomes valid and it knows the requirement has been met for that field. Another thing you'll notice, this is a pretty neat feature, the submit button is a read-only button until all 3 requirements are met. So you'll notice, you can see how interactive XForms can be. When the user enters a date, if it's a copyright, they're not allowed to enter a date range. They can only enter a single date. However, if they were to select creation, that field now becomes available to use, and they could enter in a start date and a finish date. Another nice feature of XForms is help. Very simple to add in. So now you'll notice once the user enters in the last piece of required data, the submit field becomes active and they can actually submit this form. Just like Winona had, there's a notion of repeat, so a user can enter additional title information, and I can use constraints to control this with XPath so that if it's a second title, they have to put what type of title it is. And again, you'll notice the submit button is grayed out again because the minimum requirements haven't been met for this particular node. User can delete it and change their mind. Another nice feature of XForms is with constraints. The user enters an ID. If they enter local, we make them put in the display labels. This is another nice feature. This right here allows the user to quickly review the data they've entered. So you can just go through the XML tree and it will output all the user data for a summary. Another nice feature is if I want to debug, as Winona had said, XForms is made up of instances. So you can actually view the data as it's being entered into the instances, and you can inspect each value as you actually work on the form. So this is really good for development. You wouldn't leave that in there for a production piece. So now if I submit, we can take a look at this. And that is a record created in Exist also. So that's just a quick overview of how the editor actually works. So how did I choose which XForms to use? Well, it was pretty simple. In my case, we would be serving external clients, so we could not possibly maintain all the user support for adding extensions to Firefox or things like that. As far as implementation goes, once you choose the server side, you really only have two open source options. One's Chiba and one's Orbian. I went with Orbian. Orbian seems to be by far more robust XForms solution. It's a way to build enterprise level forms with pretty much every XML related technology available to you to leverage that. I'm a Java programmer, so I was more comfortable using the XForms engine within a Java application, which is I found to be a really nice feature. To be honest, the Orbian gives you so much that it also has a bit of a steep learning curve. So I found it a little easier and quicker to get a piece running using the Java application. Orbian does a really good job at documentation. In general, XForms doesn't seem to have a lot of great documentation out there. They actually have quite a bit. They actually have tutorials and examples for pretty much every feature they offer, which is very helpful. Extremely active community. The developers are very active at answering the listserv. I don't think I've ever posted something to the listserv where I didn't actually get a response. They're very, very helpful. They're constantly improving it. The latest version is extremely stable and supports the latest XForms specification, 1.1. I've also noticed that there's some word about them creating an actual development tool to build XForms, an actual editor for the XForms. So that'll be nice. And the way you get all this desktop-like feel to the web app is naturally it's all based on Ajax. And the instance inspector you saw was an extension, which is a really great feature of Orbian. They offer lots of extensions. All sorts of things that you always wish you had, they seem to offer that in some sort of an extension. So this is an overview of how it actually all works. We've got XForms sitting on the server using Ajax to display an interactive mods user interface. User submits their metadata, goes back to the server, uses REST to post to a native XML database, Exist. And what's really great about XForms and Exist is they both leverage REST services. So XForms supports the REST services for submission, and Exist offers a REST API. What's really nice about Exist, once you post your data to Exist, now it's available for other applications to use. So we're actually using it sort of as a queue to put the records into, and then later we can wipe them out after we feel it's necessary. So now the downside. Well, it's all XML. So that means you need to be familiar with XPath especially. You need to be comfortable with XML schema. And upon first blush, I'd say it appears to be inordinately large and complicated. As Winona said, it's not a web standard yet, so it doesn't come native to any web browsers yet. So you'll be required to either go server-side or install a plugin or extension. And I think it's safe to say that most implementations aren't completely there yet. They're still a little bit buggy. You just pick which bug you're going to want to live with. Let's see. The upside. Well, XML is at the heart of the language. It is XML. So it's a means to manipulate and validate XML. It's not just a web language, it's actually a way to create an entire web application without using any scripting. Instead, you'll focus on your actual data model and the XPath you use to manipulate the constraints on that. Because of XML schema, you get strong typing, so you can enforce accurate user input, and you get a sophisticated user interface. And I've also posted the code out there. There's directions, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you.